Hello, and welcome to this edition of People in Transition. I'm your host, Bob Gerst. I've been hiring and mentoring executives, frontline employees, and job seekers for nearly 40 years through a host of transitions, some difficult, but most very good. This experience has given me a bird's eye view on a variety of trends, economies, industry disruptors, and transitions, big and small. It also brought me into contact with the thought leaders and decision makers you need to meet. Imagine knowing exactly what to do next and how to know it's time to make your big job change. We all know transitions can be scary, but it doesn't have to be. And it's even fun when you have actionable strategies and proven tactics to achieve the future you want. We'll share with you the tools and skills that can take your dreams to your next great job. So if change is on your horizon, you won't want to miss this discussion. Also, please subscribe to this podcast so you won't miss any future episodes. Ladies and gentlemen, get ready for an extraordinary episode of People in Transition. Today, we are thrilled to welcome Laura Nguyen, a visionary executive coach, author, and marketing leader whose career and personal journey are nothing short of inspiring. Laura brings a unique perspective to navigating the complex landscapes of career and life transitions. Backed by over 20 years of experience leading high-performing teams and launching successful strategies for Fortune 500 companies, private equity firms, and emerging startups. Her passion for helping others thrive is clear, making her an invaluable guide for anyone seeking to recalibrate and find renewed purpose. In this episode, we'll dive into Laura's groundbreaking book, Cove Compass, which explores the transformative power of career breaks as a way to combat burnout and rediscover clarity and intent. Drawing from her own experiences with burnout and extensive interviews that she conducted, Laura has created a guide that helps readers take a much-needed pause, reflect deeply on their priorities, and prepare to return to their careers with fresh energy and purpose. For anyone questioning whether jumping into a new job is the right next step, Laura offers a compelling case for why a career break might be exactly what you need first. This episode is more than just a conversation. It's a masterclass in resilience and reinvention. If you've ever felt overwhelmed by the relentless demands of your career or wondered how to truly recharge before your next chapter, this episode is for you. Download it now and join us as we uncover how Cove Compass could guide you toward a brighter and more fulfilling future. Good morning, Laura.
Hi, Bob. So wonderful to be here. Thanks for having me.
Laura, my signature opening question that my listeners enjoy hearing about with my guest is, if you think back when you were a child, what was it that you wanted to be when you grew up?
All right, I have two answers to that. So the first one would be I wanted to be a doctor, which was very stereotypical as an Asian first daughter. And the second would be, I think I wanted to be a member of NSYNC, which is the boy band, but I'm a female and that probably wouldn't have been possible.
Laura, before we get into the book and the details of it, I think it's going to be important for us to understand the purpose behind the book. So many people that I coach, that I read about, that we hear about, are out of work, some for weeks, some even for months. And here we're going to be talking about career breaks. How do we bridge those two?
Yeah, when I think about breaks, whether they're voluntary or involuntary, I think the key is to think about how do we use our time intentionally with the time that we have. That really is the premise of the entire book, which is, how can we make sure that we're taking intentional time to create an intentional life? And so for those who may have been laid off and have been out of work, now is also the time, this gift of time, to be able to get clear on what's going to bring you joy, what's going to allow you to live your core values and find work that aligns with that.
Before we really launch into this discussion, make certain that we're all on the same page. How do you define burnout? What is it?
Yeah, when we think about burnout, burnout is the physical, emotional, and psychological impact that we experience. And so for so many people, when they experience burnout, what ends up happening is that they are feeling disengaged, they might feel irritable, and they might feel a lot of fog for them, like a disconnection with their work and with their day-to-day, outputs. I think the challenge for us as we think about burnout is there's many different types of burnout. And so there's definitely work burnout, there's parental burnout, there's caregiving burnout, and there's relationship burnout. But if we dive into a deeper aspect of what is burnout, burnout typically has kind of three core areas. The first is overwork, where you're finding yourself spending a lot of time, effort, and energy doing the work that you're doing. The second is under-challenged, meaning that you're doing the work, but it's not necessarily engaging and you're not growing from that. And then the third is neglect. And so when we think about overwork, under-challenge, and neglect, where you're feeling disconnected from your life and what you're doing, that still spans. Think about it as a part of your workplace and your occupation, but also as a caregiver, also as a parent, and also in relationships. So that's how I think about burnout.
And Laura, you talk about there are personality types as well as environmental elements that may lend itself to people struggling with burnout. Can you describe those a little bit for us?
Yeah, for sure. In summary, some of the research that I found that was related to the personality types that are prone to burnout are 1, introverts, 2, perfectionists, 3, type A personalities, 4, those who are highly sensitive, and then 5, people pleasers. And for me personally, when I read those 5 characteristics, I felt really called out, to be honest, because when we think about it of what are the personality types that tend to thrive well at work, oftentimes it also aligns with these personality types.
And you talk about different stages of burnout. Can you describe those to us a little bit?
Yeah, for sure. So I think about the stages of burnout like going on a cross-country road trip, right? So like you've got your car all packed up, ready to go. You just filled up your tank. You've got your snacks and you're super excited. You couldn't be more optimistic. This is the honeymoon phase. This is phase 1. Phase 2 is when you're driving down the road and then all of a sudden it's starting to rain a little bit, right? But then that rain turns into pouring. And it's really hard for you to see out your windshield. And those windshield wipers are just like frantically going back and forth. And so that is what I call the onset of stress, right? You're starting to feel a little bit more stressed. But then what you notice is the rain is not letting up. You can't hear the radio at all. You can't see anything. Like visibility is what feels like 0. And you are just white knuckling that steering wheel. And we call that the entry to chronic stress. And so what you end up doing on that cross-country drive as you're driving down the highway is you try to find the next exit because you're going to have to pull over. You're probably going to need to stay somewhere that night. And you just recognize it's safer for you to do so. And so that really becomes the stage of burnout that you start to notice. You get checked in to a hotel, you find somewhere to stay, but you're physically exhausted, you're emotionally exhausted, mentally you're exhausted because you've been just really white knuckling it through this drive. And so that is kind of stage 4, which is burnout. And then the next morning you get in your car and you're driving down the road, you're exhausted, you're still foggy brained, and you're driving down and you see just that little ping happen on your dashboard, which is the check engine light flashes on. And so this is the stage of habitual burnout. And in habitual burnout, now that this check engine light is on, we have to make the decision. Do you do something different? Do you go and get the car checked out? Or do you continue driving that car down the highway?
And Laura, you talk about the phases of that burnout that you've just described. How long might someone be in each of those phases?
Bob, I think one of the key questions when you think about each kind of prolonged phase, I think one of the challenges is it can happen relatively quickly for some people, depending on their own personal journey. In the research and also with those that I talk to, what we all have recognized and what I've seen the common pattern of behavior is that typically they're in kind of that stage 3 entry to chronic stress. Like that is almost their starting point. And so they're in burnout and phase 3 for a prolonged amount of time. And then when they find themselves in habitual burnout, they almost don't recognize the symptom because it feels so normalized for them that the onset of burnout for them has been so prolonged that they don't recognize they're actually in stage 5 habitual burnout.
Did you, in your research, find any demographics that lended itself to burnout? You talked about personality types. Was there kind of blue collar worker versus white collar worker, male versus female? Anything that can help shine a light in terms of who needs to guard against this?
Yeah, I think a lot of the research, to be honest, around burnout really started in healthcare. And so when we think about that, like healthcare really became one of the emerging areas for burnout research. So a lot of studies around doctors, nurses, and then caregivers really becomes what we typically see. Now, I would say that in my research, I've run a few surveys as well, just to try to understand what are folks' reactions to burnout. And I have not seen a clear differentiation between male versus female. I haven't actually seen it even from a generational perspective. And so what's fascinating about that is the difference actually lies more in how they cope with burnout and the differences in terms of coping mechanisms. And so for females, what I've noticed most in the research is that there's a higher level of dissociation and distraction. So doom scrolling, meaning scrolling on social media, ends up being the top coping mechanism for females. Versus for males, it's do nothing, which I found to be really interesting. Like we're going to grit and bear it and continue to push through. As we think about, who's prone to burnout, I think the reality is that we're all prone to burnout. But the key is recognizing the signs and symptoms and how we're addressing them.
And Laura, you talk about that there are more than one path that you might take in your career break. Why don't you describe those 4 paths and how do you go about the decision-making process of which of those paths are best for the individual situation?
So I broke out different types of career breaks into really kind of 4 core categories. And so this is based on some of the research I had seen based out of Harvard, as well as just my own personal research. So the first are those who are engaging in a career break for passion projects, right? So think about it like as a sabbatical for someone who's interested in writing a book, or they want to learn a different language, or they're wanting to immerse themselves in different art classes. And so for them, that passion project is how they're dedicating their time and energy. The second are those who are adventurers. These are those who are kind of those freedom seeker travelers. You think about the gap year to travel the world, right? And so they're seeking opportunities for adventure, to immerse themselves in a new culture or community. And that is really their root of their desire for a career break. The third are restful recoverers. These are folks who are experiencing an extreme amount of burnout that's taken a physical, emotional, and mental toll. And so they're using a career break to essentially rest, recharge, and heal themselves. So a lot of my clients are actually in this category where they're spending their career break and ensuring that, one, from a health perspective, they're taking care of themselves. And part of that is taking a lot of prioritizing rest and recovery, meaning they're sleeping a lot during this time period. They're working out during this time period. They're spending time in nature and, they're going hiking. And so for them, this is a very intentional process of self-healing. And then the fourth and final category are those that I call soul searchers. These are folks who have a need for a radical change in their life. And so they're going on a career break to find their purpose, try to identify what matters to them, and do work that feels more fulfilling. I always say that soul searchers and resters have a lot in common. So soul searchers are going to need to rest in order for them to kind of recover and see what's next. But the end goal for a soul searcher is trying to identify what is the next path for them that will likely look dramatically different from their current path.
And have you seen anyone be in more than one of those paths?
For sure. Yeah. Even myself included, right? Like, even if I think about myself, my career break was all four. And so I'd categorize myself probably more as that soul searcher kind of a person, but it also required me to do the other three, right? So like for my own career break that I talk about, I wanted to go and travel a little bit and have some fun. And so, we did some island hopping in the Caribbean, and that was a lot of fun. And then I spent some time in pause, which is all about, making sure that I infused a meditation practice and was really prioritizing rest and recovery. And then actually at the tail end of my career break was when I really shifted and pivoted and ended up writing the first kind of draft of the book that we're talking about today.
And you say in your book that you should write down your anti-goals. What do you never want to do? Kind of put a little bit more context around that, what that means and why you should do that.
Yeah, so I love the concept of anti-goals because I often think about it like, at the end of the day, for here where I'm at in Des Moines, Iowa, it's, 2:30 as we're talking. So I know roughly about an hour and a half, we're going to have the conversation for our family of where do we want to go to dinner, right? What do we want to eat for dinner tonight? It's a Friday night. What do we want to do? And it is so easy for everyone around the table to somehow start to blurt out the things they don't want for dinner. Right? They're like, I don't want to eat here. I don't want to eat here. No, I don't want pasta. It's so easy for everyone in our household to say what they don't want. But somehow it's really hard for our brains to start thinking about what do we do want. And the concept of anti-goals is to almost allow ourselves to kind of warm up to the idea that what are the things that you don't want? Because that hopefully, right, that ends up giving us the opportunity to get closer to what do we want? But when we start asking the question of, well, what do you want? What are your goals? What ends up happening is that we feel as humans frozen because we feel like we have to have the right answer, that we're writing in ink and that answer has to be what sticks. But when you start to write anti-goals, it becomes almost like a warm up to your exercise. It allows you to start to articulate what are the things that you don't want to make sure that you can make decisions really clearly, almost a binary decision on if something comes up, if it hits an anti-goal, you know what to say no to.
And people have a tendency anyway to deal with the negative, deal with the no. And by virtue of understanding that better, you probably get closer to the yes.
Exactly. We have a negativity bias, right, in our minds. It's easy for us to be critical. And so by starting with no, it ends up opening the door to yes, because you start to be able to give yourself permission to start thinking about one of the folks that, might come up with is, I don't want to go to a job that requires me to be there at 8 a.m. every morning. And so then you start to ask the question, okay, well, what is it that's important to you then? And so is the question that, is it important for you to have work flexibility? And if that's the case, then let's talk about work flexibility. It allows you to see the inverse of a picture as well.
You talk about common fears that start to rise to the surface when you're considering a career break. Can you describe those to me a little bit? And were there any that in your own experience, in your coaching and in your research, that was displayed a greater amount than the others?
Yeah. When we think about breaks or even taking advantage of the time that you have off in between roles, typically the fears that pop up, the first one and probably the loudest is, what will people think of me, right? It's the societal judgment component. That ends up being a big one that pops up. The second one is typically financial, right? Which is, how can I afford to do this? Like financially, we're not able to do this. What if I'm not able, if I do take this time and if I don't get a job immediately, then we're going to be homeless and living on the streets. That typically is the next one. And then people go down a path of worst case scenario. I think the third then becomes, what if I get lost in this piece and I regret taking the time off because it took away from an opportunity that I could have had? So it's kind of this mindset of like an opportunity cost in a different way of if I'm taking this opportunity to take a break, then I'm going to miss out on something else. And there's many more different types of, I would say, fears and regrets around the concept of taking a break. But those would be really the most common. For me personally, I wanted to identify, the first one around what will people think, that was a really tough one because so much of my identity was really related to my work. I was very tied to what I did for a living. And that was something I was really proud of. It was something that I had put so much stake in. I had built an entire career around it. And so the concept of what will people think of me taking a break was very fear-inducing. And so what I had to get grounded on was how do I navigate this in a way that allows me to be more self-confident in how I want to take this time. The second around financial is how do you make sure that you have a strong financial plan? So I started working with a financial advisor and really thinking through from a budgeting perspective, well, what's my runway here? I wanted to understand our expenses versus our income and being more thoughtful about how we were spending our dollars and what I would need to save to be able to take a time off or how much I had in our account to be able to take the time. So I had slightly the advantage of some pre-planning as a part of that. For those who are out of work, there might be an opportunity to use a severance package to be able to kind of give you a bit of a runway. So I always think about like, how much are your monthly expenses? And what does that mean from a runway perspective for you to take some time? And it just puts numbers on an Excel sheet and makes it more clear versus having it be a theoretical component.
Am I hearing you correctly that you did this on your own, but you've been very thoughtful about your career in the past, and not everyone is going to be that thoughtful. And then sometimes some people are going to be thrust into that break. They didn't know that because it's a Friday afternoon and their position was eliminated. What do you see in terms of doing this kind of work and this thought process on your own versus getting someone else to help you, like you helping someone?
Yeah, Bob, to be fully transparent, I felt really alone in my own personal journey, trying to figure out how to navigate a career break. And I think those who go through a layoff experience, of the folks that I've talked to and interviewed, I think they experience a similar feeling of aloneness and shame. And they typically will engage with a coach that's going to help them find, or a recruiter that's about getting the next placement and not really talking about how do you take an opportunity and use this time. And so, I think there's a few core areas. I talk about it as like, who's your team? Who are the people that are going to help guide you through this? And a coach is definitely helpful, right? Like a burnout coach or a career break coach are helpful to help you understand how to plan for a break, what to do during your break, and then also how to re-enter work after your break. But I also think that for a lot of us who are going through a break and experiencing burnout, having someone that is like your therapist is really, really helpful, right? A healthcare provider who can provide you with someone to talk to and kind of dig into maybe some of the inner critic challenges that you might be struggling with, what might potentially be limiting beliefs and patterns that you might be experiencing. Those are things a coach can work with as well. But I have seen that a lot of my clients that also have a therapist really benefit from that experience. And I personally did as well. And then I think the other component is who in your life and in your family, in your friend network, can be helpful confidants for you during this process. And so I typically will include like who's your cheerleader, right? Who's your sage and who's your mentor that can help you kind of go through this experience as well. So I talk about it as like who's your inner circle or your career break and then after your career break, because you're in this kind of like this really incubator of an opportunity for you to grow and develop yourself. And you need to surround yourself with people who are going to be able to motivate you and be able to lead and listen with empathy during that key time.
Laura, you talk about the career break roadmap and that there are 4 primary phases to this career break. Could you describe those to us just a little bit? And about how long is right, quotation marks around right, for each of those phases?
Yeah, that's a great question. So in all of the research I did around burnout and also like how to structure a break, there were really some common themes that I use as a part of creating the roadmap or framework for Career Break Compass. The first is play. The second is pause. The third is plan. And the fourth is pursue. Those are really the 4 points of the compass. And so when we think about that, the reason why we lead with play is the science around play. It's led by Dr. Stuart Brown, and he talks about really, how curiosity and play and being in flow allow us to collaborate better, allow us to maximize our creativity, and really allows us to see and problem solve things differently. And so typically when you're experiencing burnout, there's a lot of brain fog, there's a lot of struggles with trying to connect dots and figure out what you want to do next. So play gives you the permission to be in the present moment and lean into joy. And I think for a lot of overachievers and really, core professionals, as adults, we somehow forgot how to play. And that's really what was important for me personally, was how do I reinfuse joy and play into my life so that way I could think about things differently and just kind of rethink a lot of the programming that I had seen and experienced, and also allow myself to be open to new experiences to learn and grow. So that really was about play. The second phase is about pause. So there is so much research around meditation and mindfulness and all of these wonderful, beautiful books that really talk about the importance of being present, right? And being where you are. And for me, I was such a busybody and a busy mind that being alone with my thoughts was probably the scariest thing that I could possibly do. And I will say that for all of my clients, pause is the most challenging phase that they go through, because it requires us to check in with our body, listen to the voice inside of us, which also means listening to that inner critic or that panel of critics, and learning how to reframe a lot of our limiting beliefs. And so pause is all about being present, meaning present for the good, present for the bad, and navigating through that as best that we can as humans. The third phase is plan. And so the concept around plan is, now that we've had a chance to have some fun and take a minute to kind of rethink things, now we have an opportunity to be more thoughtful and intentional about what's the type of work we want to do and what's the type of life we want to be living. And so in plan, there's a ton of exercises we go through around core values identification, around identifying, what your mission or North Star statement is. There's a ton of tools in there that help us really think through what's going to make us feel more fulfilled in the type of work and how we show up in the world and how we show up in our life. And then the next natural thing is to go into pursue, which is, let's go test these things out. Let's go try it and really flex that growth mindset muscle so that way we continue to learn, develop, and grow. And I know that one of your questions was, how much time should we spend in each phase? So for me personally, I spent a month in each phase. So I did, a month of play, a month of pause, a month of plan, and a month of pursue. Not everyone can take that much time off, and maybe other people are taking more time off. So I have clients who are taking a year off and have a planned 2-year break. And so that's very different for them as well. And so what I would say is that even if you could do, let's say you only have a month off and that's what you have allocated for you, then do a week of each so that you can have really focused, concerted time on each of the 4 Ps.
If you could, Laura, describe a little bit greater detail of that North Star concept. How do you develop that? And then a very useful tool that is in your book that lays out that North Star as the beginning and then has columns of objectives, key results, and initiatives. Talk through what that is all about.
So a couple things. So the North Star statement, when I think about a North Star statement, you probably think of it of like, what's your mission statement? Like, what's important to you? And so typically when you think about a North Star statement, for those who are in their break, let's say it's us giving permission to be in the break. What I typically like to answer is like, what are my priorities? What do I want out of my life? And what's my why to finding my way kind of back to myself? So meaning like your why may be different for you in your break versus out of your break, but it just provides clarity on how you're going to use the time. So a few examples for people who are in their break and they need a North Star statement would be like, I need to take this time to take care of me so that I can be better for the people around me. Or I want to take this opportunity to recharge, relax, and engage in activities that bring me joy and fulfillment, right? So that could be for those who are in their break. For those who are emerging from their break and really trying to align their core values and their strengths to their personal mission statement or North Star statement, this really comes down to just a few examples to share. Would be like Oprah Winfrey's, to be a teacher and to be known for inspiring my students to be more than they thought they could be. And then, like Warren Buffett says, to allocate my time, energy, and resources to things I believe will significantly improve the lives of others. And so I think really when you think about what your North Star statement is, it's why are you here today now? And that might change just to take away the pressure. That might change for you in a year, and that's okay. But it just gives you some sort of guiding light to work toward. So one of the frameworks that's really common in, the corporate world are the OKRs. And so when you think about it, I think about it as like OKRIs, which are, objectives, key results, and initiatives. And so inside of the book, I talk about how you can really align your North Star statement with what your objectives are, what are the key results that will get you there, meaning, and then also what are the initiatives that are going to drive to that. And so let's just say, for example, that one of your key objectives is to grow. So it means like seek opportunities for curiosity and learning. That's one of your core objectives. And from there, the key result is to read at least 20 books a year and interview 100 people. And so in order for you to do that, you have to break it into something that is more actionable and bite-sized. So the initiatives then become read at least 2 books a month. And then, for the interview, it's creating a framework for interview processes and interviewing at least, 10 people a month or something to that nature. And so the thought process is, as you create your OKRs for yourself, not just in your work setting, but you're doing it for yourself, it allows you to break down, here's my umbrella mission, here are my core objectives, and here are the actions I need to take to be able to achieve that.
Laura, you have a statement in the book, following your passion is a terrible career advice. What did you mean by that?
Yeah, I think I had growing up and getting all of the messages that we should follow our passion. From a work perspective, we should definitely follow our passion. And I think one of the challenges that we have with following our passion is that passion changes. Like passion is intended to be like a spark in a frying pan. It's not sustainable. And so what happens is if we continue to follow our passion, you're always going to chase after something that is not going to give you the end result that you're looking for. And so what I typically like to think about is rather than, following just our passion, I think we can allow ourselves to be creative, but more importantly, we need to follow our core values. Because our core values give us a direction that we need to really develop into. And it actually will reduce the likelihood of burnout because it's more grounded and rooted internally for you versus when you follow your passion, what tends to happen is you burn out, you flame out because you're trying to chase something as quickly as possible to get there.
Laura, we've gone through so much great advice here this morning. If our listeners only remember 2 or 3 key items from this discussion, what are those 2 or 3 items you want them to remember?
Yeah, the first one that I want folks to remember is to give yourself permission to enjoy the moment that you're in. So often we find ourselves, especially if we're out of work or we're trying to think of the idea of taking a break, you're just trying to fast forward everything to the next moment. But we have this one life. And so being able to enjoy it and be in that present moment is so key and critical. The second is to really be mindful and thoughtful about understanding and seeing the signs of burnout. There are more people experiencing burnout than not, right? I think the study is 77% of people experience burnout. And so see the signs and be able to mitigate and remedy them more proactively versus finding yourself in habitual burnout. I think that is really the key, is what are the tools in your toolbox that you can use when you start to experiencing burnout yourself? And then the third key component that I want to make sure to share is you're not alone in your burnout. And I think so many people feel very, very isolated and lonely when they're experiencing burnout. They feel like they've failed. They feel like they're experiencing a lot of shame because of their burnout. Something is wrong with them. But like I said before, 77% of people are experiencing burnout. If we could come together and identify what are ways that we could help navigate through it, then that's a very different story. And so I think one of the key things is reach out to someone, find a coach, find someone in a community, be able to connect with other people who can help you navigate your own personal burnout into something that feels more balanced and authentic for you.
Laura, I know that I can speak for the listeners that having you there with them as they're going through their career and the different stages of it and potentially burnout is going to be a huge help to them. So I want to thank you on their behalf. Appreciate your being with us today.
Thank you so much for having me, Bob. I hope that, as these are heavy topics, right? And the weight of it feels like it impacts both our careers and our lives. But the truth is that you're not alone. You've got coaches and community members that can help you. Don't hesitate to reach out.
Thank you for listening. We're working in unprecedented times. The purpose of these episodes is to give you the support and critical tools to adjust with the changing marketplace. I'll continue to introduce you to guests who have successfully survived their own obstacle course and can share useful information. If today's message was helpful to you, please share it on your social media. Your review and rating helps get this to more people. Also, if you have questions or podcast ideas for future conversations, reach out to me on LinkedIn. Change is constant. The more prepared you are for it, the better and easier the change will occur. Thank you again. This is your host, Bob Gerst. See you at our next episode.